Baruch Hashem. The Daf Yomi is we're starting on Menachos Daf Zayin. So we're dealing with the case. Our Mishnah said that if you did the Kamitza with the left hand and then you did it again and then if you did the Kamitza with the left hand, it's disqualified. Also, other areas of if you do it, a person who's disqualified is disqualified, or a manner that's disqualified. Whereas Ben Beseira says you can go back and do it again. Rav says that then Rav came along and said a statement that if you did the kamitza with the wrong hand, or if a non-Kohen, it says Rav's statement was a non-Kohen who did the kamitza, he could go back and do it again. The Gemara says, well, what's Rav saying? Is he saying like the Rabbanan? The Rabbanan say not like that. If he's saying like Rav, then like Ben Becerro, then what's the chiddush? So the Gemara says that the Gemara gave a couple of suggestions as to what Rav was saying. And then the Gemara says at the end that Rav is teaching us the Chiddush that even after he did the Kmitza, he was then put it into another utensil to be Mekadesh it, it's still okay according to Ben Beseira. Then there's an alternative version of Rav, and he argues with the Tanaim. These two Tanaim who say that if he put it into the was Mekadesh, he did that next step, it's no good. These two Tanaim. And then the Gemara says there's an alternative version of Rav where he says just the opposite, where he says Ben Beseira says it's only good as long as you weren't Mekadesh it. So then the Gemara says, so Rav Nachman challenges these two Tanaim who are of the position that if as long as you weren't Mekadesh it, then Ben Beseira said it's okay. But if you put it into a second utensil, Ben Beseira would say it's not okay. Because they want to know what is actually their position. What's actually their position? If they're of the position that Kmitzas Psuon is not an avoda, that it's not that if a zar does it, it's not an avoda. If that's the case, if he puts it in the utensil, what did he do? So then Rav Nachman comes along and says it is an avoda. But he hasn't completed the avoda until he puts it in another utensil. And that's why these two Tanaim say it's not disqualified until he completes the avoda. So Gemara says, well, if that's the case, even if he didn't put it in another utensil, but if he put it back in the first utensil, it should be a problem because he's mekadesh it back in the first utensil. So Rav Yochanan says, or on top of Zayin and Menachos, Zos Omeres, well, this teaches us the principle that to put it in the kli shares, which is a sacred utensil, it's only mekadesh it if you have the intent to be mekadesh it. But if you don't have the intent to be mekadesh it, it's not disqualified. So the Gemara says, well, does that mean hamidas mekadeshin? You mean to say Rabbi Yochanan's other position that if you intend to put it in, it is mekadesh? It can't be. One time Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan, kli shares ma'ushay kachu stulin l'chatchila, that can disqualify, let's say, a zar, can even mekadesh the flour by putting it into a klisharis. And Rabbi Yochanan says the Amarle a mekachin. Rabbi Yochanan says no, that's not called kiddush to be allowed to be brought. So we see from here, Rabbi Yochanan says even if he has that, it's not mekadesh to enable it to be brought. So the Gemara answered that question. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan says it's not Mekadesh to be able to be brought, but it is Mekadesh to be disqualified. So that's what we got up to yesterday. Rabbi Yochanan's other position that if a Zar puts it into a Klishares, it's not Mekadesh to allow it to be brought, but it is Mekadesh to disqualify it. Rav Amram says a different way in which we're going to say that if you put it back in, it's not going to be disqualified. Why? Rav Amram says, "Kagon Shech Zero Lavisa Gedusha." So that he put it back into the utensil, but it was heaping, and so since he put it back into the heaping utensil, meaning to say he didn't really put it back in. He didn't put it really back in, and so therefore. The Klisharis is only able to sanctify what's in it, but this is on top of it. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, if he didn't put it back in, he just put it on top of it, mikmat kamatz. Well, then how did he do the kmitza at the beginning? The kmitza needs to be from the flour and the utensil, and this was not in the utensil. So therefore, the Gemara says, "Al gon zero labisa to fufa." No, so it was exactly equal. It was completely full, but it was not overflowing. And so at first, when he took the kmitza, he took it from the utensil, but when he puts it back, he's putting it above the utensil. Gemara says, what are you talking about? Just what's the logistics there? Given the comments like of a laguma, when he took a scoop, he was making an indentation. So when he returns it, why isn't he putting it back into the scoop? The nurse says, no, the ukimta is when he put it back, he just put it back on the wall of the utensil, and therefore and so therefore he moved it and it fell on its own into it. And so therefore you can't be Mekadesh the Kometz by having it fall. And so therefore, it's like a monkey did it, or AI, a computer did it. You have to do it yourself. So the AI does Kamitza, it's no good. If you get a robot to do the Kamitza, it's no good. And this is where it put it back like it fell in on its own, it's no good. So that's the other way in which, even though we put it back, it's not going to be sanctified. So now Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabbi Zera, but I'll give you another way in which you could put it back and not disqualify. Look, Ma, why don't we say, says Rabbi Yirmiyah, you don't zero l'kli, munach hadar bekarka. Why don't we say you put it back into utensil that's on the ground? And so therefore, even if he has intent, it wouldn't work because it's on the ground. And you can't be mekadesh something if the utensil is on the ground. So we see from here, from the fact that we don't give that answer, that you could do kamitza and you can be mekadesh in the utensil that's on the ground. Gemara says, wow, so that's what Rabbi Yirmiyah wants to say. So Rabbi Yirmiyah says he wants to say this to it. So that's what Rabbi Yirmiyah wants to say. So Rabbi Zera says, oh, you're giving us that approach? I'm like, Kanagat, but Bayadi Bayalan, the Rabbi Avimi. Excuse me, Kanagat, but Bayadi Bayalan. This is the question we're talking about. This is actually the approach that we're talking about in our base medrash. Why? The Rabbi Avimi Tani Menachos Bei Rav Chisda. Because Ravimi went and studied Menachos in the yeshiva of Rav Chisda, and that's what they were talking about. Gemara says, wait, 1 second. Gemara has 5 lines of tangent, but the tangent is probably the one thing we'll remember from today's daf, at least me. Ravimi Bei Rav Chisda, Tani, did Ravimi really go and study with Rav Chisda? V'amar Rav Chisda, Kulfi Tavi Bali Me'avimi. Allah da Shmaita. He says, I got a lot of smacks from my Rebbe, basically, Avimi, because I forgot a specific teaching. What was the teaching? In those days, the Rebbe would hit the students. Now we don't allow it. If the Rebbe hits the students, the schools should fire the Rebbe. But in those days, the Rebbe used to hit the students. Now he says, Bo ha'achriz retzufin lamed yom sheni v'chamishi. That let's say there's an orphan who has property and you need to sell it, so you need to make a proclamation. So before you make the proclamation, if you're going to do it every day, Ritzufin, if you're doing it every day, you have to make the proclamation for 30 days. If you're doing it Sheni v'Chamishi, if you're just doing it every Monday and Thursday, it's Samach Yom. It's just 60 days. And so we see from here, Rav Chisda said, I forgot that teaching. So Avimi was smacking me. So if that's the case, how come Avimi went to the yeshiva of Rav Chisda to study Menachos? So the Gemara says, Avimi Mesechta is Akra. Avimi forgot the Mesechta. Isakra is Akra. He forgot the Mesechta. But also the Rav Chisda had Kurei Gamrei. And so therefore he came to Rav Chisda, so Rav Chisda should remind him of what he once knew. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, why didn't he send a message to Rav Chisda to come and teach it to me? I'm the Rebbe, come and teach it to me. No, so he said, this will allow me to be more successful. And Rashi quotes the Gemara Megillah Davavam Beis Mishum Yagati Umatzasi. The more effort, if a person says, I put effort in, I found it. But if he doesn't say I put effort in, we don't believe him. That if a person says, Well, Yagati Matzasi, I didn't put effort in and I was able to be successful, don't believe him. But if with Torah study, but if he says I put effort and I was successful, then you believe him. So now the Gemara goes back to the before the tangent, and the Gemara says, so that was the question. We had learned from here that you can be Mekadesh even though it's on the floor. And then Rabbi Zera says that's the question that they were studying in the yeshiva of Rav Chisda when Avimi went. So the Gemara goes back to this question. So Pagabe Rav Nachman, Rabbi Zera came across Rav Nachman. Excuse me. That now Avimi, when he was returning from, that's what Rashi says. Avimi, when he was returning from the yeshiva of Rav Chisda, Rav Nachman came across him. Pagabe Rav Nachman, he came across him. Amarle Ketzad Komtzin. He said, how do you do Kmitza? So Rav Nachman is asking Avimi, give me the practical. How do you do Kmitza? Amarle, so he points to a utensil. He said you could use this utensil. He said you could use this utensil. If this would be a kli sheretz, you could do kamitza from it. He says this utensil's on the ground. Can you use it? The magbale kohen. So Avimi said, I didn't mean exactly like this. I meant you could pick up a kohen. The kohen could hold it, and then he could do the kamitza. So then Rav Nachman continued to ask Avimi questions. He said, Ketzim and Kachin. By the way, Rav Nachman is not just a nobody, Chatz Hashem. Rav Nachman was the Av Bezdin. He was the head of the Holy Bezdin. And so we know that he knew everything. And yet he was asking Avimi. So he says, Ketzim and Kachin es akometz. He says, how are you mekadesh the komets after you do the kmitz? So you have to put it in another utensil. How do you do it? Amrei no snil aklize. He says you put it in this utensil that was in front of them. If there would be a klisharet. So the Gemara says so he says, wait 1 second. It's on the ground. Amrei the magbale kohen. Well, it says if that's the case, how are you going to do it? It can't be on the ground. So Avimi says you have a kohen who holds it. So now you need 3 kohanim. Rashi explains because they couldn't put it in their left hand. So one kohen had to hold one utensil in the right hand, the other one had to hold the second utensil in his right hand, and then the kohen would have to take the kamitza from one bowl and pour it into the other bowl. So you need 3 kohanim. So he says, so what? More kohanim on the payroll. Amrwei Avimi says, he says, big deal. If that's what you need, it's for the carbon tummy, you need 13 kohanim. There's no big deal that you need 3 kohanim. The Gemara says, do you really need 3 kohanim? But didn't we learn by we learned in the Brisa, it says, this is the one who does the kmitza, and he puts it in the utensil, and he carries it, and he burns it there. And if he does it with the intent, whatever, he does it with the wrong intent, it's okay. If he does it with the right intent, it's okay. If he does it with the wrong intent, it's not okay. But it doesn't list this guy, this going who's in charge of just holding the utensil. The Gemara says, Tana Seder Avodos Naket, below Seder Kohanim. No, it doesn't talk how many Kohanim are needed in that case. It just talks about the order of the service itself. It doesn't talk about how many Kohanim are needed. So, by me name to Rav Sheshes. So then the Gemara asks the question from Rav Sheshes. Ma'al likmots mi shal gabe karka. We're still at this question, the same question that Rabbi Zera said. You got to the question discussing Rav Chisda, and it seems to be that Avimi said you can't do it from on the ground. But now it was still several generations later. It was still unsettled with the time of Rav Sheshes. They say to Rav Sheshes, can you do a kamitza from utensil that's on the ground? So he says, Amrwei, puk chazi my abdin ladav. He says, go, let's see what they did in the Beis HaMikdash, in the sanctuary itself, with the lechem hapanim. Lechem hapanim was the bread that they put on. We know from other sources, including this Gemara, that the lechem hapanim was actually a type of mincha. It was really a category of a mincha, but it was the bread that they put on every Friday, and they removed 9 days later on the next Shabbos. The initial look, they put it on Shabbos, they baked it on Friday, they put it on Shabbos, and they removed it on Shabbos. The old one on Shabbos. What? They were both one was inside the Beis HaMikdash, and one was in the courtyard. but we'll see that you'll see on Mabeis that Rashi says that they have the same properties. Kmitza has to be in the Azara. No, there are parts of the Azara where Yisrael could walk. We said there are 11 amos of the Azara where Yisrael could walk, and there the Kmitza was allowed. So Amarle, let's see what they did inside the base of Mikdash with respect to the Lechem Aponim. Arba Kohanim Nichnasin, 4 Kohanim enter into every Shabbos into the sanctuary. Shnaim Ochtam Yadam Shnei Sidarim. 2 of them are holding in their hands. Each of them is holding a tray, and each tray has 6 loaves of bread on it. I'm not sure if they're holding a tray, if they're just holding 6 loaves, but and so 2 are holding the 2 sidarim, and 2 are holding in their hands biyadam shnei bezikin. 2 of them are holding 2 bowls of the frankincense. The arba makdim lefneim, and then 4 go in front of them. Shnaim we told shnei sidarim, 2 to take off the 2 loaves of bread from the 2 trays of bread. Ushnaim we told shnei bezikin, and 2 of them to take off the 2 bowls of the frankincense, which are going to have to be burnt on the mizbeach, on the courtyard altar. So we see from here that it only mentions 8. On top of Zayin base, but doesn't say anybody has to pick up the table. Lo katani. And Rashi writes here, so we see from here that they would take the utensils they would take it from the utensils that was on the ground. And Rashi writes in the second line, Bezikin matirin et alechem, and the bezikin, when they are burnt, that allows the bread, kikomitz shematir es mincha, the equivalent of when the kamitza allows the shirayim of the mincha to be eaten. The komitz is called an azkara, and bezikin are used that same word azkara. And so therefore the komitz allows the shirayim, and the bezikin allows the bread to be eaten. And we see it's taken while the table is still on the ground. The Gemara says, no, Rav Amar Sasam. Didn't we say in the other Bryce, in the Mishnah, didn't we just say that Seder Avodos Nakad, it only mentions the Avoda, but not the number of Kohanim? Achinami Seder Avodos Nakad. It just mentions the number of Avodas, but doesn't mention the number of Kohanim. Gemara says they're not the same thing. Midami, they're not the same thing. Hasam lo Nachas Minyana de Kohanim. Hachan Nachas Minyana de Kohanim. No, the Mishnah over there didn't go into the topic of how many Kohanim there were, but here we're talking about, it mentions that there were 8 Kohanim. Isa, listening Magbiaf, the Kohen who was lifting it up was there, it should have mentioned him. We see from here, you can indeed do a kamitza from a utensil on the ground, Shmamina. So now Rava says, Amarava, Pshitu Ishakom Rava says, basically, I agree with this idea, which really Rava was before Rav Sheshes. He says you could do a kamitza from a utensil that's on the ground, because in fact we find that by the siluk of the bezikin, if they did the kamitza while it was still on the ground, they removed the bezikin while the shulchan was on the ground. And also, you could be mekadesh the mincha, meaning to say you can put it into before the kamitza, you could put it in while it's still on the ground, because they would put the bezikin onto the table when it was on the ground, or when the shulchan was on the ground. And we just said that the bezikin are the equivalent of putting the flour in, or it's like the komates. It says, "By Rava, kiddush kometz mai." So now Rava says, but I have a question. The sanctification of the kometz, that you put it into another utensil, mai. Do we compare this to the sanctification of the mincha, and it's okay to be mekadesh it even when it's on the ground? Or do we say it's the equivalent of the kabbalas adam? And so therefore we're going to say, just like the Kabbalah can't be in a utensil that's on the ground, also The putting it into the second utensil, it can't be on the ground. He says it says we compare it to blood. And therefore the second utensil can't be on the ground. Did Rav really say this? Didn't Rav say if you have kometz and you divide it up into two utensils? Rav Nachman Amar Eino Kadosh, Rav Amar Kadosh. Rav says it's okay that even though you put the kamitz into two separate utensils, Vemisa Leilav Midam, we know that the dam has to be in one utensil, so he should say that that's no good. So Hadar Bade Rava Me'ahi. So Rava indeed retracted that position that a kometz in two utensils is okay. Gemara says, "V'dam minawan delo kadosh l'chatzayim." How do we know that blood is not okay in two separate utensils? How do we know the kabbalah of the blood it can only be in one utensil? Gemara says, "Well, we know this. The Tani Rav Tachlifa ben Shaul. Rav Tachlifa ben Shaul taught this, and this is not about the blood of a carbon, but this is about the mechatas, the water of the red heifer, which is mixed with the water which is of the meishiloch, which is mixed with the ashes of the red heifer. That you need to have enough there to do the sprinkling. A very small amount. We saw this in Masech Zevachim. But kidesh pachos miktei v'haza b'klizeh upachos miktei v'haza b'klizeh. So let's say you put the water into two separate utensils, and each one does not have the amount. Low kidesh. It's not good. V'baylo. And about that question, we know by a paraduma it's not okay in two separate utensils. But damai, what about blood? Do we say that the law by the red heifer is the hilchas? It's the law from Moshe Sinai. It's just a straight law. No reason you can't learn from it. Odilma also my timer. What's the reason by the red heifer? The taval b'mayim. You have to immerse it in the water. And here too, the Kohen has to immerse it in the blood. And so therefore, is it based upon the Helchasa or is it based upon the logic of the verse? So Rebbe Lazar says also by blood it's no good. And so therefore, that's the basis of the logic for Rava's position. And Amar Rava, in fact, it's not just this logic, it's a Tanya Namiach, we have a Bryce or two. It says, and this we have already, we did this in Zevachim, if you remember. We did this in Zevachim. Remember, we did this in Zevachim. Where did we do this in Zevachim? We did this on Daf Tzadi Gimel in Zevachim. We said, it says in the pasuk v'tavul, it says he has to dip his finger. That he's not allowed to clean off his finger before he does the sprinkling of the blood towards the sanctuary. Badam shir tefillah mikaro. That the blood needs to have enough to sprinkle it from the outside when you're mekadesh it. Just like Rav Bizreika said, that it needs to be in a full one utensil. Minadam shebe'inyan. And we'll see what that phrase means. We needs to say v'tavo and also badam. Because Rachman v'tavo, if it just said v'tavo, havamina afagav delo kibel shir tfilos. I might have said that it's okay as long as he sprinkles it, even though initially speaking he didn't have enough. Because of Rahmana Badam. Therefore, Torah says Badam that from the outside it needs to have enough blood. Because of Rahmana Badam, if it just said Badam, Avamina feel misafik, that he could even do it like after he cleaned it the first time, he could take it from the side of the utensil. Because of Rahmana Badam. Now we said from the words Minadam, we learned Minadam Shabinyan. What did that teach us? What does that mean? Amarava. So if there's any blood that's left over after he does the one sprinkling, he says, "Oh, I have some extra. I can just get another one with this done." That would not work. He has to dip it again. He has to clean it and then dip it. And Rabbi Elazar, and this supports Rabbi Elazar's position. It says the remnants of the finger are disqualified. So he says. Tanya. He says, so Ravan, the son of Ravada, says to Rava, your students say that Amar Rav Amram, that Rav Amram said a taina, that a tanya, hayamazev v'nitza azamiya. So let's say he was sprinkling the blood, and some of the blood went onto his finger. Imachlo hiza. If he didn't, if before he threw it again, the blood went on his garment. Don kibus, then it requires kibus because it's capable of sprinkling again. But Misha but once he sprinkled it, ain't ton kibus. Then afterwards, he wouldn't have required kibus washing. It's not considered dam chatas. My lab don't want to say. How do we explain this price? So that until he completes his hazah, if some went on his garment, he would require washing it. Mishagamar hazah, so but only if he went afterwards, after he finished, he required kibbutz. So we see from here that the remnants of the blood on the finger are kosher, because otherwise it would not require kibbutz. Because it's in the middle. The Gemara says no. It's not if it's as long as it's in the middle. No, until he did the initial one, it would require kibbutz. Once he does one initial time, that's it. Abaye challenges this because didn't we learn in Mesechas Para Gamar Milahazos that once he completes his, and this is basically a repetition of what we had in Devachim, if you remember it. He completes his sprinkling. Mekaneach Yada Begufa Shapara. He washes his hands on he wipes his finger on the cow itself, so he'll be burned with it. Gamar in lo gamar lo, doesn't that mean once he's completed, then he has to do it? But in the middle, he doesn't need to. So we see from here the remnants of the blood that are on his finger are not disqualified. Amrle, no. Gamar mekaneach yado lo gamar mekaneach etzbo. Once he finishes all the sprinklings, he cleans his whole hand so he'll burn to blood. But as long as he's not finished, then he just has to be mekaneach etzbo. He just has to do his finger in between. Where it says Bishlam Gamar Mekaneach Gada Begufa Shel Paro. I understand that once he completes, he has to wash then on the paro itself. It says we have to burn the cow in front of him, clearly with everything. How does he clean his finger? What does he clean it on? The Gemara says, he cleans on the edge of the bowl because they'll say Kippur Ezav. The bowl is called an atonement. Okay, so this. Okay, we'll stop here today's daf. Yeah, shekach to everybody. Baruch Hashem. Shekoyach. Today's daf.